What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Mettle Labs Podcast. It's your boy Terry Goofy Jones. We got my man Mr. Clay here.
What's good with you, baby? We're a little distant, so I might have to reach you like this. All right.
AKA Mr. Peaceful. You know, we got a wonderful special guest here today. We got the phenomenal Dr. Holt.
Yo, in that building.
Yeah, man. How you feeling?
I'm feeling really good.
And he's something that before meeting you, I wasn't even aware that you guys existed, a traumatologist.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yes,
man,
we do exist.
if you don't mind just sharing, how'd you get that? Because, that's vicious. That's mean right there.
That's a really good question. I wanted to look at more root causes to mental illness, psychiatric disorders, and things of that nature. And so a lot of it came from the emotional injuries of trauma. So I had to do some postdoctoral work of getting certification in traumatology. And traumatology is one of the most robust, I believe, upcoming genres in this field in healthcare and in psychology. And so to have African American kind of like be the face of this, I think it's pretty dope.
Yeah,
definitely is. Definitely is.
And it's funny because when you think of like society now, like everybody right now is talking about mental health.
Yeah.
They're talking about trauma.
Yeah.
And, people are pointing people out like, man, you need to go get your trauma checked out because, man, you tripping out here. I guess help us understand, like, what trauma is and, why is it that now that is such an important word today?
It's a very important word. American Psychological Association defined trauma as a mental, psychological, and emotional injury or wound to the brain. So that's kind of like, how we look at it as far as its interpretation, but let me layer application to that. And the application interpretation for information purposes would be, is that when life devastating things has happened to somebody or life threatening situations happen to somebody, it actually not only impacts the brain, but can rewire the brain and create these injuries in the brain. And guess what? What happens when you don't treat a wound? You get an infection. And so that's where mental illness and mood disorders start coming in, and a lot of things is because when we have unchecked trauma, it begins to impact our whole body. And so how we defined it, yes, it's an emotional injury to the brain when something really tragic has happened to them. And it's not as simple just to always pick your head up and everything is going to be all right. There's some science to this. And if we don't heal from our trauma, we bleed on people that didn't cut us. So you hear me say that all the time. And so trauma is certainly real. The root word of trauma means wound. So even if you get into a car accident and have physical trauma and have to go to the ER because you have swelling in the brain, that's trauma. That's physical trauma. So it's a wound. It's an injury. So when we say I'm traumatized, it means really I've been injured, I've been wounded, and I need to treat those wounds before it fester and become maladaptive.
Yeah. Okay, that was definitely some information I think we all needed to know. Nah, for sure. You put that beautifully. I ain't gonna lie to you. Yeah.
My favorite part of that was him talking about, like, if you don't get the wound healed, you're gonna bleed on somebody else. So
facts. Yeah. That's a fact. We see it all the time. We see it all the time. But I guess, growing up, we just not able to identify it as, how you just put it. But I think a lot of people, like you were just saying, Clay, have these wounds, and as we going through it, we not able to say, oh, this is trauma. It's a new thing, like you said, that everybody's like, oh, that is trauma. The reason why you doing that or maybe doing this, there's trauma in this wound. Something happened to you that ain't been cleared up.
And that the bleeding on somebody, right? So. I've heard the term vicarious trauma. And they talk about how if you take a child and you put them in a class with, 10 other kids and all 10 of them are suffering or have suffered physical abuse at home, that 11th child will display symptoms just by being around those other children, will display the same symptoms. So when you think of your work as being a Black traumatologist, how important is how important is this vicarious trauma and like the social, like the group of us injuring each other?
So what I'm thinking of when I do training and presentations, I think about the 3 E's of trauma. One is events, one is experience, and the other is exposure. So we're really acquainted with the events part and the experience, that direct contact of trauma. But I think what we don't really consider is how dangerous it is of our high exposure to trauma, which simply means that, yes, I get traumatized by directly experiencing it, but a lot of people don't understand you can actually be traumatized by the high exposure of somebody else's trauma. Think about it, if African Americans, we've heard the vicious things that have happened in slavery, and that information through history has been passed on from our great-grandparents to our grandparents to our parents to where we are. Did I live during the Jim Crow times? No, I wasn't even born then. Did I live in times where there was lynching? No, I did not. But because of the anxiety and the paranoia and the hypervigilance of my ancestors.
That's a big word, then.
Right.
I love it.
Right. So it has been passed down to us. And so though I didn't experience slavery and I didn't experience all those things that happened during civil rights and things of that nature, but when I watched how dogs was biting on people marching and they were spraying the water hose and they was beating them down.
Type of way.
It made you feel some kind of way. So I didn't directly experience it, but I was exposed to it. And we also have to walk, when we talk about vicarious trauma, or also another term is secondary traumatic stress, STS, it speaks into a space of, if you keep being around a lot of trauma and you don't address your own trauma, now you have a compound of trauma of your own personal and everybody else's trauma. Now we have that vicarious trauma, and it also makes us lose our compassion. We start getting compassion fatigue. We begin to lose our love for our community, lose our love for our neighbor, our homie, or whatever that looks like. So this thing, and then vicarious trauma is also associated to the professional's trauma, which means that if I keep working with patients with trauma as a doctor, or I keep working with clients with a lot of trauma as a therapist or a counselor, and I don't pour back into my cup like I need to, then now I got a deficit, right? And so that vicarious trauma of everybody else's trauma is now bleeding on me, and then because I don't deal with myself, I bleed on other people, and now you got a bloody mess.
That's right.
So vicarious trauma is something that if I keep working with other people's trauma and I don't deal with my own and deal with my own wellness, now everybody else's trauma is making me emotionally implode, and now I'm getting burnout. Now I'm losing my passion for my career. I want to quit. I want to do something else. So this thing really grows, and there's so many different types trauma out there that Americans don't know, and this is the reason why the traumatology is on the come up as its own specialty.
And so you said that there were 3 E's. What were the 3 E's?
Experience, events, and exposure.
And those 3 E's are the ways in which trauma.
3 ways of where trauma comes into a person's life, either by an event, by an experience, or exposure.
Okay, yeah. And so when I think of 3 E's, I think about what my grades were when I was in middle school, around those knuckleheads that was off the chain. So
and it's funny because I was that kid too, right? So a lot of people.
That's hard to believe with all these words coming out.
Right?
Man, look,
hypervigilance, I love it, man.
Hypervigilant, hyperarousal, sympathetic nervousness. So we can talk into all those spaces. But I flunked the 1st and the 5th grade and almost dropped out of high school.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and I had a route to prison from school. Okay. But because I had some individuals who intervened, I didn't have a dad, so I was out. Had almost a moment, ruined my future. But there were some things that really got me, to where I am today. Number one, a teacher never gave up on me. Yeah. So education is crucial. And a lot of times people don't understand, especially coming from the hood, education is not only your way out, it's your way up.
Wow. Yeah.
Right?
I like that.
And so education was my way out and my way up too. I had the Urban League give me my first job. When I was 14 years old. So instead of slinging dope and out there hustling, they gave me my first job, gave me a life skill that impacted my life for the rest of my life. Then my church had a youth ministry, at-risk black youth. Mm-hmm. So they helped me get off the street, and this is how I began to have a relationship with God for myself. And so all those three major things was crucial to why you have a Dr. Holt that is one of the leading charges as a national trauma expert today.
Wow.
Is because of those things. And then finally, I would say, I think this is a calling for me. Okay. Like, I'm not doing this because I don't have nothing else to do. I just want to try something out. I'm like working hard to trailblaze in this area, is because I do believe that trauma is a public health crisis. I believe it is a matter of public health in America today. And you need someone that can articulate this in such a robust and comprehensive way. And then I look like a lot of the people that's struggling with trauma as well.
Gotcha. I think that's a huge thing. I think that's a huge thing coming from, just being, I would know if you was to say something to me, and if I didn't know you from a can of paint, I would listen. Because because you look like me. It really come down to that. Am I going to hear you out? Because you could you know a lot of words, and you know like you said, you know how to like convey this to somebody. If somebody else come to me and they not from, or they don't look or seem to come from where I come from, or nothing like me, I'm gonna be like, all right, I hear you. Bunch of big words, but you ain't talking to me. You know what I'm saying? But when I'm able to speak to you and understand that you may be able to understand me, and then you may be able to teach me more about myself than I could possibly know. So I think that's a big deal there.
So okay, let me ask you about this, right? Because you. Like, so remember, I don't know, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, Kanye said that his diagnosis was his superpower, right? So, and this is the question I'm going to ask you. Like, all of us have had experiences in our life which have hurt us, injured us, rocked us to our core. All of us have gone through adversity. And a lot of it has traumatized us. Like, what's the difference between those who are able to rebound from it, look at it as a superpower? I don't even know if they should look at it as a superpower, but what's the difference between those who are able to thrive, take it and do something special,
use it to build,
and those who are like destructive and really whether or not they're destroying the people who are around them or themselves? Like, what do you think is the difference that creates that pathway and how people?
Yeah. So I think one describes self-sabotage, and the second one is trauma resilience. And those are two different things. And so I think we have to be careful.
You got to break that all the way down. Okay.
So it's a lot of meat on that bone. So let me start shredding, right? Well, I think obviously we go back to what is trauma. Right, we have to properly define it as an injury and a wound. I wouldn't call a wound a superpower, and I want to be careful with that because there's already a stigma with people who have mental illness, that have psychiatric disorders and mood disorders, and we have not normalized that enough to where people feel comfortable to be vulnerable and say, you know what, I'm not right. When that family member molested me, I'm 47 years old now, and I still don't know how to deal with that. We got to be able to have those vulnerable, tough discussions, and it still be a safe space,
right?
To say, when I was emotionally abused and told that I'd never be anything and I'm just like my crackhead daddy, and I've heard that for 20 years, and I heard that prophecy over my life, and I end up having addictive behaviors and things of that nature. We need to be able to normalize that and say, there's times when I'm not okay, and it's okay not to be okay. And there's something else too. I would say there's something I call in my work trauma polishing, which means you've been wounded and scarred, but because now you got a degree and you got a few letters behind your name and you got some credit and you can buy a house and live in a different zip code, you still toe up from the flow up. You just live in a different zip code.
Yeah.
Facts.
Right? So you got to be able to have those safe spaces to be able, when men get together, and a lot of times, especially black men, we probably wouldn't get together with a therapist, but our therapist is the barber we go to every Saturday.
Facts.
Right? And we have these vulnerable discussions about not being okay. So I just want to normalize that instead of saying I'm a superpower, I would just delve it back a little bit and say, No, there was some hell and high water that came in my life, and it really messed me up, and it jacked me up. And it's okay to get to that space to say that, because I don't know how to treat you,
right?
If I don't know how to diagnose you, right?
What it reminds me of is the Free Breeze commercial. Where a person is blindfolded, and they got him in the room. Looks horrific. It looks like his dog stuff all over the place. But they spray the Free Breeze. And so sometimes it seems like money and education and success for some people.
That's actually going on.
And people, it's like putting lipstick on a pig. Like they think, oh man, this is a great thing. Let me be like this guy right here. But
well, this is the deception. Even when you spray the Free Breeze, if you don't kill the bacteria that creates the odor, right? So that Free Breeze is going to dissipate and disappear. But if you didn't deal with the bacteria and the microorganisms that creates the odor to make everything stinking up in there, right? The odor is going to come back. Let me speak into the space of trauma resilience. And the resilience piece is that, do bad things happen to people? Yes. Data says 70 to 80% of Americans have experienced at least one traumatic event. 70 to 80%. Do you know how high that is? We're not talking about 25% of the population. Right. We're not talking about 40% of the population. We're talking about 70 to 80% of Americans today have experienced at least one traumatic event. That's a lot of people. And when the simple thing I'm making a point is, a lot of Americans that experience a lot of trauma in their lives. And just because you had some injuries doesn't mean you got to self-sabotage, right? It doesn't mean you got to violate your community and bring violence and bring devastation and gang violence and spraying up the hood and 5-year-olds is catching bullets like Chi-Town, things of that nature, right? But you can get you some help, right? You can get a support network. You can get your therapist. You can get your doctor. And sometimes you can get a pastor, life coach, whatever that looks like for you, and start working on yourself and healing so that you can be the best version of yourself. Now, that does not mean that something bad didn't happen to you. So resilience is not the absence of a tragedy. Resilience is, I'm a rebound and thrive despite the tragedy, and that's the difference.
That's a big difference. Yeah. That's deep, man, and very well put together. And just to turn that just stay right where you're talking about.
Sure.
And because you brought up a good point. Every day you turn on the news and you see like these acts of violence, right? And so you see people who, today there was a shooting at a funeral home, right? You guys see that in the news?
No, I didn't see that one.
And somewhere near a funeral home. And
that's a normal thing at this point.
Yeah, and so like the fact that you have the individuals who are living right now, and according to the way in which you lay it out, they're so hurt that they're willing to hurt anybody anywhere. I
seen a couple cases of like just situations like that. I was actually watching an interview before I got here of an artist from, I ain't gonna say his name, but an artist from here, and he was just talking about the first time where he experienced his friend dying, right? He said he came in the house and he was saying he was talking to his mom, and his mom knew what he was about to do. Basically, he was going to go retaliate, just real quick, I don't think his mom knew what he was about to do, because I doubt, she would have let him out. But he was just, and the guy interviewing was asking, like, wasn't nobody around to say, hey, you gonna stop this? You gonna do nothing? And he was just kind of saying like, nobody could tell me at that point. You know what I'm saying? Even if they was to. And then he was saying, I would basically, like, he was saying like the Boys in the Hood scene. Like he was like Boys in the Hood to him was just a movie, because we would never. In his mental, he said, I would never say, nah, we not going to go get back. You know what I'm saying? And I found that so crazy, because I was like, you that traumatized to where, like, you don't even realize you about to traumatize yourself even more doing what you about to do, you know? Yeah. But I don't know. I just found that so crazy. And even to what you were saying, people will go to this extent where I seen another video today where this guy had beat up this other guy's sister because that one guy was talking about his dead friend. So at that point, there is no, everybody's just trying to, get back, and all of that to me is just insane amounts of trauma to where you have lost your principle, your morals, and everything, and you just in it. You don't realize what's going on no more.
Right. Yeah. And so what you saying? Let me, if I can, I want to turn this into a question for you, brother. Sure. So, one, as Goofy was saying, that the guy's mom, he said the guy said that his mom saw that it was in him, that he was getting ready to do something. Yeah. And so, like I heard you when we were in the other room, you were talking about the sympathetic nervous system versus the parasympathetic nervous system. Yes. So what is that? Okay. And then what is it? Is it possible that if a person is triggered, that you can see it in them, like their behavior, their mood, the way in which they display is different from how they normally are?
Yeah, that's dope. Yes, the answer is yes. So as a traumatologist, we look at how trauma impacts the whole person. And so remind me to go back to that, because I want to really hit that. I think this is going to be very important for your podcast to talk about that space. But to answer your question, is that possible? Most definitely. So in the autonomic nervous system, well, you have your brain, you have your nervous systems. That's kind of like the neurological system. And then it's breaking off into some subgroups. And so just for time perspective, without being a nerd from the hood, is that you have your autonomic nervous system breaking up into two, and you have your sympathetic nervous system, and then you have your parasympathetic nervous system. Now, this is very important because God gave us this when he created us, and that is to protect us from danger. So if you are walking through the park and you run into a black brown bear, or you walking down the valley and you walk into a python or some king cobra snake, right? In seconds, your brain, your thalamus, is going to transition that information in the brain into your frontal lobe and also into your amygdala, which is your fear center, to get you aroused to protect yourself. So there is a physiological response where your pupils dilate, your muscles constrict, your breathing change, and you get this rush of adrenaline and cortisol from your hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. And that pushes you, right? It pushes you into this fight or flight, where you're going to fight your way out, or you're going to run your way out, or you're going to freeze and immobilize. That's how we respond to trauma. So all of that happens through the activation of your sympathetic nervous system. So let's bring more application to the interpretation. And that is, if you in a club and you chilling and you hear somebody fire off some rounds with an M16, immediately your brain says danger, and you go through that whole process that I just talked about and get you into survival mode, right? Well, the thing about it is, the way we were created, we were to address that from a temporary perspective. But the problem is, many of our communities get caught up into being stuck there and having a stuck, hyper-aroused sympathetic nervous system. And so what that looks like in more application is, you see more neighborhoods where we got guns, we got gun violence, we got gang violence, everybody's attacking each other. That's because that neighborhood, that hood itself, has a hyper sympathetic nervous system that got everybody on lock on aggression and violence and things of that nature. So that's what happens when you are right. You gotta be
on point at all times.
At all times, right? And so you on guard. That means sometimes your defense mechanism may be too high. And so you have a difficult time building attachments, allowing people to come in and build relationships. So we see that. And then dissociation, right? You just shut down and you have trust issues. That's dissociation. So that's what we talk about, the hyper-aroused sympathetic nervous system. Now, the parasympathetic nervous system is supposed to balance that out by bringing a calming. And this is the reason why anybody that's been traumatized need love. Because love releases oxytocin, which is a love chemical in the brain. I really call it dose up.
Okay.
Right? Dose up. And the dose up acronym means your dopamines, which is your pleasure chemicals. Oxytocin, the O is your oxytocin, which is your love and affection. When you get a hug, you get an embrace, or you get some dap from a bro, you release an oxytocin, believe it or not. And that's that's not just human to human contact. Your dog can help you to release that as well. Your pet. Then you have serotonin, which is your balance and your moods, make you more regulated. Then you have your endorphins. That's called dosing. So anytime you have a lot of fighting, a lot of arguing, when you got a lot of violence, that's called a cortisol high neighborhood. When you, even in the workplace, when everybody don't get along and everybody can't stand each other, that's a cortisol high office.
Cortisol high
office. When a person is getting ready to get a divorce and they always be fighting and arguing and never get along, that's a cortisol high relationship. That's because people, me too, right? Yeah. So
I think we all relate.
Right. Every time you get around that person, your cortisol is high. That's why you don't get along. That's why you argue all the time, and it also make you dissociative where you don't want to be around that person. So you got to be in your own space, right?
Tell me about
but this parasympathetic nervous system is when we bring love, when we bring care into the room. And this is always important when I'm talking about people getting help. I don't care how many board certifications a person has or a license somebody has or how many degrees they have. If they don't love and they don't care for their patients, they are creating a level of malpractice. You got to love people. And what that does is love and safety calms the brain and body to where now you can actually bring help to them. So my last thing I speak into that is, this is the reason why some people say, I went to a therapist and it just doesn't work. It's because you have a heightened sympathetic nervous system that needs to be calm, because right now, your trust factors is out the window. All that abuse that had happened to you has got you so hypervigilant. With an aroused sympathetic nervous system, it's difficult to do counseling. It's difficult to do therapy. And a lot of times, and this is another thing that's good for therapists to know, don't beat yourself up because your interventions have not been working, because that's all not you. Some of that is just the patient just so aroused in their nervous system. We got to bring calming and bring well to them.
I get that. That's powerful. And so now I think I can say that I speak some Black traumatologists, and so I'm gonna try to paraphrase what he just said.
I was gonna try to do the same thing. I was like, he said some stuff, but I got some examples in my head.
Okay, so you want to go first? You want me to go first?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm gonna say that what I heard him say is that we are living in a society with advanced technology and advanced civilization, but we're still being controlled by caveman instincts in the nervous system.
That's right.
That can be triggered. It triggers us to become Hulks. And then by the time we come back to our senses, we are clothes in shreds, we half naked, and we need a hug.
I like that.
Okay, did I hit it? Did I hit it?
No,
Okay.
I like that.
All right,
That's
okay.
dope.
So what I heard, right? What I heard was, as you were speaking, I was just giving myself the examples, right? Through the relationship, to being outside, the guy who's on point, the guy who got finessed by a female one time, so he don't trust females that he meet. He got finessed by some of his friends, what we call backdoor. You know what I'm saying? He got backdoor, so now he ain't trusting them. He keeping the gun on them all the time. Every car that drive by his head, you know what I'm saying, on the swivel. And he just there because it's what is it? It's parasitic?
Sympathetic nervous system got him on alert.
Yeah. It got him on high alert. And then the other part you was talking about is
parasympathetic.
No, not that part. There's a lot of words, all right. But I'm gonna just describe where you went.
We're gonna let him go because he did say parasitic nervous system.
But the part where you was just talking about like your environment and always being on alert, because I remember specifically being in a relationship, but we lived together. So I'm like, when I'm in there, like all day I was good when I was outside. The second I get in, it felt like I walked into the fire. Like, you know what I'm saying?
That cortisol high relationship.
And then the cortisol high relationship. You know, I ain't never been in a work environment like that, but in the house, it's a super real thing. And it's like, how am I on guard already? Like, how am I? Like, it's like a ticking time bomb in here. And like you said, until you get your own space, it's just up. You know. And so that's what I related with.
I want to ask about that because it does seem like if you're in a relationship, you're married or you live with somebody, and you all are arguing and having like you all are having an issue. Y'all had a real bad argument. It does feel the air is like, ugh, it's like, you feel like you can't relax, you can't calm down, what is that?
Okay, yeah, I'm glad you asked that. I was hoping that we can go a little deeper in that because I have people to ask that. So, what we saw in the science is that even in a relationship, there's also something called relational trauma, which is you in a traumatic, toxic relationship. And what we also saw is same way when we talk about trauma from violence and stuff like that. Really, what it is when I say cortisol high, cortisol is a stress hormone that's released when you are in fight or flight. Is it possible for a spouse or is it possible for a significant other to bring trauma at the house? Absolutely. And in that relationship, and so trauma is injuries, it's emotional. So sometimes when you arguing, when you saying all kind of ferocious stuff, you going below the belt. It's emotional abuse, it's verbal abuse, it's condescending, it's disrespectful. It releases your cortisol level. It puts you in the fight or flight. So now you're tense. So every time you come home, you have this defense mechanism because every time you get around that person, it releases your cortisol levels, right? So it puts you in that fight or flight. So that's how people also get into domestic situations because that person will really pull the worst out of you and the out of character of you and get you into a place to where you lose your temper and do something crazy because your sympathetic nervous system is at a certain high and your cortisol levels, stress levels is at a certain high to where it got you to acting out of character. And now before you know it, it's not until the calming of your nervous system, you come back to yourself and you be like, I cannot believe I did that. There? I'm sitting in a county jail doing something that I said I would never do. Is that kind of making sense?
Nah, that make a whole lot of sense.
So what we saw when it comes to relationships is that the longer your relationship will work and the longer your marriage will work if you dose it up. You got to dose it up with dopamines.
All right.
I'm going to have to get that.
And give that to me again. So the dosing.
It's not in that one. That's another book. That's another book coming out.
We got to be careful because some people will take that the wrong way. And then they go to the liquor store. Where they got the dose at.
Dosing. Yeah, we're talking about brain chemicals now. We ain't talking about drugs. We ain't talking about substance abuse. We're not talking about that. Dosing up is science. Is when, believe it or not, when you first meet somebody and you fall in love, you don't have high cortisol. You have dose. She dosed you.
Wow.
That's that high that you feel. That's the butterflies. That's talking on the phone for 3 hours and ain't even saying nothing.
Babe, what you doing?
Bro, what you doing?
What you doing?
You just holding the phone. Right. You know what that is? That she dosed you up. Dopamines. That's the pleasure. O is oxytocin. So you're feeling all of that affection and love. And then the S, she is serotonin. She balances out your mood. You're in a good mood when you just with the right person, right? And then your endorphins, right? Which is that energy of attraction. That's all connected. That's called dosing up. The more you dose up your relationship, dose up your workplace, dose up your classroom with educators. Kids learn better when they're dosed up. Kids do horrible when there's high cortisol. Is that kind of making sense? That's just something. I'm just giving you neurobiology.
Okay, so
that's not. You can't just do that and say that word. I'm just. ain't that simple. But you make it sound. It sound good. I'm getting it.
Yeah. Does that kind of make sense though? When you start to think about it,
all the sense in the world.
Yeah, totally, man. All right, man. So here, I got a curveball coming at you, Doc.
All right, let's go.
Yeah. Let's see. We're gonna take it up another level. Take it to professional level. Okay. So, like, we're talking about trauma, and we're talking about individuals who are being traumatized, and a lot of them going out, and especially if you talk about guys who are going out and doing a lot of that are acting violent, right? Okay. So, if they're not, let's say you have somebody from a neighborhood, and if there's never been an activity or an action that's happened outside of the house that's been the traumatic experience, then where is that early trauma coming from?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a lot of times I think when we think about trauma, we think about, well, let me talk into this space. Okay. So trauma impacts the whole person. So that's what I wanted to get to. So to just take note for our listeners that's listening. Trauma impacts your neurology, which is your brain and nervous system. 2, trauma impacts your psychology, which is your mind and your emotions and your mental processing. Then trauma impacts your physiology, which is healthy tissue and healthy organs in your body. Then trauma impacts, fourthly, your spirituality, to where trauma can be so intrusive and so painful and with high levels of brokenness, it impacts your soul.
Wow.
Goes deep down to the soul. And fifthly, which is also another dangerous one, is trauma impacts your biology, which means that many of our traumas have been passed on through our genes to our DNA. What? Because the generations before us did not address their trauma. So some of us are dealing with granddaddy's trauma.
Interesting.
Yes, it's called the science of epigenetics.
So and just so I understand, let's say you have somebody who never met their parents. Is it possible that the trauma could pass even though they never met their parents?
Absolutely. Ask the foster care industry about behavior, and they'll tell you that.
Wow.
They might not can articulate it the way I articulate it, but
they say something
they see it. They see it. Yeah, they see the same behaviors that the kid never met their parents and have never even read the file of their parents, but exhibit the same proclivities.
Just in proclivities. Yeah. Like that. I'm taking that one. I'm taking that one on the road with me. But nah, I see that a lot. Where moms say this all the time, you just like your daddy, but the person they never met.
Never met the daddy.
Never met the daddy. Just like them, whatever it may be, they just like them.
That's right. That's right. And so we pass those on through biology. So we also traumatize by biology because many of the traumas that great granddaddy went through was passed on to my granddaddy, and then my granddaddy passed it on to my daddy, and then my daddy passed it on to the children, and then the children passed it on to the grandchildren. Wow. Even if the grandchildren have not even been born yet, their genes are already getting ready to be activated by those same traumas that the prior generations went through, and it's called intergenerational trauma. We pass it on. Wow. Not just behaviorally and from a society's perspective, but also from a biological perspective.
That's deep right there.
And is there a way to stop this?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
Yes, glad. That's another great question. The answer is yes, thank God. So you can heal from trauma. So I always say trauma may be part of your history, but it doesn't have to rob you of your destiny. So there's still hope. Even though the trauma has happened to you in your past, you still can rewire the brain, neuroplasticity, so it can learn new habits.
Yeah, there you go.
And simply, I don't want to just be throwing out words without giving interpretation. So when we talk about neuroplasticity, and that's when we rewire the brain, because see, the body as well as the brain can repair itself if we give it the resources that it needs to repair and heal itself. Well, not just the body does that, the brain does that as well. That's what we call it, neuroplasticity. As a matter of fact, when you have a stroke and the side of your body is not working with the right treatment and neuroplasticity, we can heal the brain, and there can be some repair and some recovery from even a stroke. So when we've been through a lot of trauma as well, we can also use neuroplasticity to rewire the brain to learn new habits, adapt to a new life, and not just survive but thrive. And so that's what gives us hope. And we can see on the MRI a traumatized brain. I think I did a presentation here when I was here. And then you had a healthy brain that had a lot of love, support network. And you saw how healthy that brain was, okay? And so I said the good news is even if the train started out being abused in an abused home or started out being in a home where there's substance abuse or violence, with the right care and love, support and therapy and treatment, that right brain that was abused can actually shift over to a rewiring of new neuroplasticity and have hope for a brand new trajectory in their life.
I love it. So okay, because I definitely have I definitely want to ask this too.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like what you're hitting on is this idea that in spite of how difficult and how debilitating trauma can be, that there is something that we have inside of us, which is trauma resiliency.
Resilience.
Okay. So my question: How much value is there in the things that we say? So, for instance, if someone has gone through and they know, like people say, okay, he's just like his daddy and his granddaddy, both of them were alcoholics, he's going to be an alcoholic.
Yeah.
If he says in his mind, I choose not to be an alcoholic, and he says it and seizes that as like what he wants within himself, and then another guy says, well, okay, I'm just going to be like him. Mm-hmm. How much does that make a difference in like being able to activate the resiliency?
So I think what we do is not in a neuroplasticity, but we tap into more of a cognitive behavioral therapy approach.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is pretty much when you look at the structure of cognitive behavior is, number one, you got to go to the core belief systems.
Okay.
Right? Core belief systems shapes your reality, what you believe. Now, you can be fine as wine, but if you believe you're ugly, it doesn't matter what the compliment somebody say.
Southeast effect.
Yeah. Right? So in your core beliefs, you have to have a belief system, right? And that's where it boils down to. Your core belief system is, despite what my dad was, I got a choice. I can go into the path of destruction, and that'd be my reality, or I can reshape my whole reality from the zip code I've been born and raised in, and dare to dream bigger.
Wow.
Than that all I know is hood, right? And so that's your core belief. Then now you shift from core beliefs to your thoughts, right? And we know thoughts have power. Even if you're a person of faith, I believe, as the scripture says, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. You become the product of your thoughts. Romans 12 says, be not conformed to, or be transformed by the renewing of your psyche. Your psychology and your mind have to shift. Your cognitive thoughts have to shift. So thoughts have a lot to do with your future. Then what feeds the next step is your moods, which is your feelings. Think about how you feel, and then I tell you must was thinking about something for 5 minutes, right? Thoughts feed fuel into your moods, how you feel. And then moods shift into your words. You start speaking certain stuff. Think about some of the stuff you said, and think about the moods you were in when you said it.
Right.
Right. That comes from your thoughts.
Gotcha.
And then you have your words turn into actions. You start doing based on what you speak. So words, I'm just showing you a pattern. Words are very powerful. I do believe that death and life is in the power of the tongue. There's a lot to do with what you say that brings manifestation in your reality.
Okay. And so learning how to, like you said, the cognitive behavior and your thoughts, your thinking, and all of that, so talk to me about Black Trauma, your book, and how by buying your book, how that's going to be able to help me to develop trauma resiliency.
Wow. Yes. So everybody knows as a traumatologist, I do work in the field of traumatology as whole for in the general perspective for all people, because I believe all people, despite of race and culture, ethnicity, have experienced or go through their different types of trauma. But there's something outside of the different genres of trauma, like we got acute trauma, we have chronic trauma, we have complex trauma, we have historical trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder known as PTSD. So you got all these different type of traumas, but there is something in the historical trauma subgroup where there's traumas among African Americans. And every minority group have some level of historical trauma, far as our Hispanic and our Latinx group have their level of trauma in their culture, far as border issues and things of that nature. And then our Native American brothers and sisters who've had their land taken away from their language, their culture, and then pushed onto reservations. And their trauma and substance abuse traumas are very high. But we cannot negate the fact of Black trauma among African Americans. And so what I wanted to do is write something specifically for my people and for my culture and my race that was unapologetically Black. And just because I'm unapologetically Black doesn't mean I'm anti-white, anti-Asian, anti-Native. But I do understand that because we wasn't immigrants that chose to get on boats and come over here for a whole ideology of what America was. We were forced over here. We were put over here, and we were in chains, and I wanted to write about the journey, 3 or 4 month journey from Africa to the Americas, of what just the journey of being on the slave ships, just getting here, was traumatizing. The book talks about 300 to 400 slaves.
Talk about
in the
resiliency.
ship. Yeah, right. Yeah. Was chained to each other for 3 to 4 months. They could not move. It was a smelly situation because of urine and feces. I mean, it was a very traumatic journey, and many slaves didn't even make it over. Right? They died, and they threw their bodies right over into the ocean, like trying to get over here. Yeah. That was traumatizing. We talk about the black codes, the Jim Crow, the segregation, the discrimination. All that is in the book. Talk about how racism and all those things have played a part on impacting the brains and bodies of the slaves and the descendants of slaves, which will be us, and how a lot of that's been passed on. Talk about epigenetics, how a lot of that trauma has been passed on through our genes and our DNA. And I also asked the daring question, if I could do an MRI 400 years ago, what would the brain of slaves look like? Which would be scary, right? So we talk about a lot in the Black trauma and helping African Americans to understand some of the stuff you experience that has something to do with race or a bad contact with a racist or anything like that, or why we don't trust police in our neighborhoods and how we feel hyper aroused or hyper vigilant, things of that nature. There's something specifically that is for our pain and brokenness among Black people, and that is Black trauma, what happened to us. Yeah. And then the book start closing out on what are some best practices to start healing as Black people in Black communities and things of that nature, getting therapy, seeing our doctor, understanding all those things that is important. Another thing about trauma, too, is that trauma also impacts our body in such a way that it makes us sicker. So more communities of color, more African Americans that don't really address their trauma, they're more sicker, right? You see the chronic disease. You see that if we don't heal from trauma, you keep releasing all of that cortisol stress, that it creates inflammation. Right? And inflammation turns into autoimmune disease. And then you start getting autoimmune, you start having metabolic diseases. Now your body don't respond to insulin anymore, and you're borderline type 2 diabetes.
That sounds like a whole nother
that's a whole
conversation we
gotta
have. If you're talking about, like, especially in the Black community, I mean, we've, the illnesses that we generally suffer from. So you're saying that trauma is history has a
yes.
Wow.
Yes. Obviously, there's some other contributors, but trauma is still a big thing, that if we can't get people to heal from trauma, it makes their body sicker. And you ask different people that can't turn off the trauma in their lives, they are sicker. They're hypertension, their stress is high. So they have cardiovascular issues. We're seeing trauma is a connection. Sometimes early childhood trauma is a connection with autism. We also seeing early signs of dementia. So they got brain inflammation. So dementia is no longer the 80-year-old disease anymore. That's beginning to be younger and younger and younger. High cortisol mean more weight gain, obesity, type 2 diabetes, all of those different things. Obviously, to add to trauma is, poor nutrition. Another thing about trauma is I look at your gastrointestinal system. So I want to look at your gut health. And people that have high levels of trauma have some more stomach issues as well. Man. So we can go on and on. Low immunity, it is
serious. Up all everywhere.
From the brain to the
ferocious.
gut.
Yes, it's ferocious.
To your big toe. So based on all of what you shared with us so far, I the only way in which I've been viewing this is really kind of from a psychological or from like a behavior, not even understanding or realizing until you just said that part right there, that you're also talking about our health.
Yes.
I've heard them talk about ACE adverse child experiences.
Yes, yes.
And depending on how many levels of trauma or traumatic events you've had in your life, that it can shave off time.
Oh, yes.
On your.
It'll take about 10 years off your life if you don't get treatment and address your trauma.
Okay, so that's gonna be part 2 right there. So we gotta have you come back, man. This was powerful. Yeah. I threw my fastest curveball, man. You knocked it out the park on me, man. I'm embarrassed, but nah, I couldn't be more proud. So where can we find you? Where do we pick up that book?
All right, man. You got to get the book. I believe, my mom used to say, closed mouths don't get fed. You got to ask, and so I want this book. This book is so dope, so powerful, so impactful that I want this to be a New York bestseller. In order to do that, I got to get 10,000 people to just go out there and go crazy and buy this book. So I'm asking everybody from the Mettle Lab universe to go out and get Black Trauma. I need 10,000 of y'all. I mean, if you want to do 50,000, you want to do 80,000, let's go.
Don't put no cap
right? Let's go. But I need at least 10K of y'all to go out and go get this book and go crazy on Facebook. Not on Facebook, Amazon, to get this book. So we're on Amazon. So go to Amazon, type in the book. I got a colleague that wrote it with me. Her name is Dr. Carlene Dawson. She was an educator. Yeah. And then I'm the doctor. So we put our work together and made this very powerful book. So kudos to my co-author as well, Dr. Carlene Dawson. But go get the book. It's on Amazon. And yeah, let's make this a New York bestseller. Let's kill the game on this. We got a volume 2 coming out called Black Resilience. Nice. So man, it's gonna be dope when this come out as well. But no, I just wanted to thank you guys. I'm so humbled that you guys took a chance on me to let me come on your show and on your platform. And so Clay, keep doing your thing. Goofy, keep doing your thing. Yeah. Let's bring healing to our city. Let's bring healing to America, and let us heal together.
And just so y'all know, buying the book is not for him. Well, it is for him, but it's for you. Yeah. It's for your family. Yeah. Because as he's saying, and you heard him say that, if you're not doing something about it and healing your trauma, if you still got open wounds, you bleeding on your family. Yes. It's your family.
And look, a lot of people don't go to therapy. If you want to try to figure it out yourself, here we go, right here. You know what I'm saying? You ain't got to come in the office to read. Yeah. So
that's start. It's a good start. And last thing I would say, if I do a lot of presentations and keynotes. So if you want one of the dopest trauma experts in America, man, get a hold of Dr. Holt. My email is damond@damondholt.com, spelled with my name, DAMOND @DAMONDHOLT.com. Email me and let's go. I'm doing some work in school districts. I'm in Baltimore this week. So if you're a superintendent, you're a leader, even CEOs, you want trauma resilient as a human resource policy in corporate America, holla at your boy and we'll get you right.
I love it.
Last thing I wanted you to plug in is you was telling me about your podcast.
Oh, yeah, my podcast. So we just got a new trauma show coming out called The Unbreakable Show with Dr. Holt. You'll find The Unbreakable Show on our YouTube channel under the banner of The Unbreakable Show. So we're looking for a whole lot of subscribers to get on and join the movement of healing. You'll find us on TikTok, the Gram, and other social media platforms. We're just trying to have brave conversations to push trauma is a matter of public health and to bring healing into our country. So thank you so much. Thank you so kindly, and God bless.
Yeah, he's a good dude, and y'all see him that he got on the Captain America colors on. So he's coming to save. He's gonna save a lot of people.
To save the world, one trauma at a time.
One trauma at a time. Let's go.
Save the world, brother.
Let's go.
Appreciate you. Keep banging. How you doing,
yes, sir,
man.
Okay. Bless you, man. Bless you. All right.